I'd like to introduce our next presenter, John Marshall. He's the CEO of the Potential Energy Coalition. And John is a senior client advisor for Lippincott and the founder and chairman of Potential Energy Coalition. It's a newly formed nonprofit organization that brings together leading marketing firms to increase public awareness of climate change. He served as the chief strategy officer at the marketing consulting firm Lippincott for the past 10 years. He's also a professor of marketing at Dartmouth College. He has 30 years of experience advising the leaders of Fortune 500 companies on their brand, marketing, and innovation strategies. He's a frequent commenter and speaker, and we're really happy to have him here today. The Potential Energy Coalition, as some of you already have been exposed to their work, have recently produced a number of campaigns that were quite successful. John will be covering those. One is Science Moms, and the other focused on women is Vote Like a Madre. So the only other piece that I would mention is that we have a couple of videos that John would like to show you. And because we're on Zoom and because of buffering, we're suggesting that you copy those links into your own browser, and we'll take a few minutes for you to watch those. I'll hand it over to John first, and he can kind of walk us through the timing of that. But just to draw your attention to, in the chat, there are two links that Maria's put there, and there are a couple of videos, and we'll be looking at those. So without further ado, John, thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited. I personally have been scrolling and crawling through the Potential Energy website and looking at the messaging and the approach that you've been using. And I'm really, so thrilled to hear more about the campaign and about your work. So over to you, John.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. You forgot to mention the most important intro is that I'm from Kingston. And so there's like an extra reason that I wanted to hang out with a Canadian-led effort. So it's a pleasure to join you all. So I have been a career business person and marketing executive. And one day my 17-year-old came home. I think this is an experience a lot of us have. And he was taking a course, a correspondence course with Dan Schrag, who's the head of the environmental department at Harvard. And he came home and said, Dad, the frickin' world's coming to an end and you're not doing anything about it. But he took it to the next step. He locked me in the house for 48 hours and said, I want you to produce for me. And he said, you know something about communications. I don't think climate communications is nearly good enough. What are you going to do? And so this is a true story. And I sort of started down this path. I had some of my cushy executive job. I started down this path of calling fellow executives and CEOs and said, would you put a team on climate change communications? It's the hardest product you'll ever sell, but it's the most important product you'll ever sell. Will you do that? And so I ended up creating a network of really good communicators who volunteered to do work on this issue. And so that was the birthing of Potential Energy, which was basically a bunch of marketing, career marketing dropouts. Like I'm work for a B of A and CVS Health and Comcast and all these big companies saying, okay, how can we apply our toolkit to the area? And so that weekend sort of changed my life a little bit. We ended up, about 25 of us ended up leaving our jobs and doing this full time and raised some money from some of the foundations to do it. And I think I probably met a bunch of people on this call as a part of that journey. We decided that we would be kind of ruthlessly analytical about the whole thing. We weren't going to bring any particular perspective, and I was new to the climate issue, but what I was going to bring was the toolkit of the professional marketer, the analytics, the insights, the digital measurement, the segmentation, and let the data lead us to impact. And so I'm going to share with you what we've learned, but one of the first places that led us, to be honest, which is kind of unusual for a 55-year-old man doing this, is one of the most important, well, several groups to talk to, but and I'll share the data with you, but really talking to moms was really important. And so I'm like, okay, great. So that's the direction it's taking us. At least I'm a dad, but and I'm surrounded by some great women leaders and great moms and diverse team that does the work. But so let's go do that. So we've been doing persuasion campaigns targeted at moms. We have 2 running right now, and one is called Science Moms. and the other one was an election campaign called Vote Like a Madre. And I would just love for you guys to just start this by watching 2 ads. And so if you look in the chat at 1:28 p.m., Maria put in that link, and then the one right after that. So I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to do this, just because it'll be a better experience than my computer. Is that okay with everybody? And any thumbs up? Make sense? Okay, so everybody go on mute, watch the ads, and then I'll give you a presentation. Okay, great. So should I start up? Have we gone far enough?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm on a mission to make people cry and laugh. I have a really good creative team to help me do it. You know, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the learnings, and I'm sure it's like there's still so much more to learn. But these 2 ads did really well. We ran this campaign. We're running this campaign, Science Moms. We've gotten significant increase in the size of the climate change movement as a consequence of that. And we just got the data back, the voter file from Vote Like a Madre, and with several tens of thousands of incremental voters on climate change. And so I'm psyched. I think marketing can make a difference. And I'll now go over to my presentation and tell you some of the things that we've learned. So I'm going to want a thumbs up just to make sure that I am visible on this, just from anybody. Thank you so much. All right. So I've got this crazy coalition of researchers, inside people, digital firms, marketers, creatives, media companies, who are all trying to figure out the conundrum: how do we get people to care about climate change? And that the story I often tell is, like, if you were an alien and you came down to Earth and you talk to 100 scientists, you'd be like, okay, there's a problem that you guys are surely solving. And then you talk to 100 citizens, you would discover that, you know, 40% of the planet's never even heard the term climate change, and only 27% of Americans are highly concerned about it. So it's just a really weird situation that we've got this dire situation where the planet's going to be hard to live on, and we're not making enough progress. So my view is what we have is a failure to communicate. And we beam up the scientists, and 100% of them agree, and we beam up your regular people. And, you know, 27% of people in America are highly concerned about it. So what my learnings are about are a people-first approach to climate communications. And this is like the core thing for anything in marketing, whether you're selling Oreos or shoes or an issue. Like, who's your audience and what do they care about? So I've got 3 lessons that we've learned and that we apply that I want to go over. One, maybe the most important, is that I get it. The second one is that it matters to me. And the third one is maybe the most powerful, is it matters to people like me. So we've served about 600 million ads and measured them. We've done randomized control tests, about 40 or 50 now of different ads, and we've measured about 3 million people's responses to ads in our lab. So we're starting to get some learnings. I still won't say that we've necessarily solved it for sure, because it's so hard, but I'm going to share some of those. First, a brief sidebar. Okay, so this is like a daunting thing. And this is my little chart that I use for funders, that the top 5 fossil fuel marketing spenders have a pretty big budget compared to my operation. And it's no surprise that the US trails Europe in scientific consensus, belief in scientific consensus, by 24 points, because marketing works, because messages impact people, because when you do it effectively, you do move people. But the good news is that, and this is where we can take a little solace, when we give somebody a climate change ad, we move people in the other way, and we move them more. This is an ad we've been doing with Climate Power. It's called The Great American Build. It's about how climate change creates jobs. We are lifting people by 7% in terms of their support for immediate action. If they instead see the ad from the American Petroleum Institute, they have a 4% decrease in their desire to see action. But if we put them both together, we win out. So we got the truth on our side. So that's a good thing. But the opposition messaging is tough. So here are 3 rules that I want to go through, and I'll show some other aspects of our campaigns. So one is, we've really found that I get it is incredibly important. When we first started our work, we went into the flood zones in Florida thinking, oh, they'll tell us how to connect on climate change. And after about 45 minutes in the focus group, we're like, okay, we asked you what your concerns are, and you talked about healthcare and jobs, and now we're talking about the traffic, and then it was shopping, and like, when are you going to talk about climate change? And so it just doesn't come up nearly as much, and people don't tend to have the foundations. I did some research, which is a little sobering, but I think it's really important for us to communicate effectively. And this is true across all audiences. It's true across women, it's across men, across the alarmed, the dismissive, the cautious, the concerned. People really don't know much. 41% of people confuse it with plastics, 38% with the ozone hole. Only 12% of Americans, this will be true for Canadians largely as well, think that a plant-based diet causes, helps lower emissions. Twice as many people believe in a conspiracy theory called chemtrails. And so one of the things, if we're really people first about our communications, we need to keep thinking about is the fact that we got to meet people where they are, and they're not really thinking about it that much, and they don't know that much about it. And by the way, that is not just as true, it is more true for the activists. Okay, so for the 7% of people who are highly engaged, they know no more about climate change than anyone else. In fact, they're just as confused. They've chosen it because they've chosen a series of other dimensions of their political identity, and climate change fits in there, but you do not have an educated issue public on the issue. And less than 1/4 of people understand that there's complete scientific consensus on the issue. So we have to bear in mind as we communicate that there is a really low basis of understanding, and we need to meet people where they are. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. It's also true in Europe, by the way. it's kind of true throughout the world. In fact, even more people in the UK and Germany confuse it with the ozone hole than they do in the US. We really feel, and this is like a really important tenet of communications, that policy is not the same as marketing, okay? So here's a little experiment that I did where we asked people to sign a petition. And we said, sign a petition to get to zero emissions by 2050. And then on the other side, we gave them the opportunity to sign a petition to save Florida or to stop coastal development. It is 1/3 of the cost to do these simple, basic things than it is to get people to sign up for this policy goal. Now, everyone's talking about net zero, and everyone's talking about zero emissions and having emissions, all this stuff. People don't know what we're talking about. And by the way, why is zero such a great place to go to? Who wants to go to zero? So we really need to expunge the policy language and start talking to humans. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, what a great day for some decarbonization. And yet, for some reason, we've fallen victim to this particular line of logic. People don't know what decarbonization is, or net zero, or anthropogenic, or greenhouse gases, or methane. They're not really engaging in that. They do understand what pollution is, by the way. We'll come to that in a second. So plain, vivid, universal language is something that we think is incredibly important. I don't even think we're quite there yet on this, and we're not necessarily doing it enough. But instead of warming, talk about overheating. Instead of emissions, talk about pollution. Instead of changing climate, talk about extreme weather. Talk about things that get people's attention, that they pay attention to, that make sense to them, because that's what's happening. And we've lulled ourselves into a certain complacency with terms like global warming, both of which are good. Global is good, and warming is kind of nice too. And so we're trying to use language that really captures what's happening in a way that gets people's attention. The other thing that we found works really well are foundations and simple mental models. So we've run randomized control trials with a little over 100,000 people with a whole bunch of different messages. So we have a test and control. So some people see a message, some people don't see a message, and then we see what happens in order to lift it. The vertical axis is how much we lift conservatives, and the horizontal axis is how much we lift progressives. And we actually, for a couple of things there. One, there's a bunch of stuff that lifts conservatives, so do not despair. Everyone can become a climate activist. The things that do it most are educational messages. They're foundational messages. There's 99% scientific consensus, or climate change in 30 seconds is an explainer video about what climate change actually is. Those are uniting messages that lift all groups. We were curious about the fact that whenever we did a focus group on climate change, everyone talked about the ozone hole. I'm like, this is annoying. Like, this was 1993 when the ozone hole was discovered, and you keep mentioning the ozone hole. Why is it? It's because it's a hole, it's a layer, it's something that people can imagine, they can envision, they can see it, they can feel it. Whereas climate change is an oddly vague description of a phenomenon. So we're increasingly talking about a blanket of pollution. in order to relate to people. That people get, and much less so about climate change. So I'll show you a little video which we use as an explainer, which has gotten us a pretty significant list. So the terms in this video are all we found fairly effective. Are you guys still good on seeing and hearing? I'm looking, Maria. Okay, amazing. Whoops, I'll show you this video, and then I'm going to keep on cruising.
Humans have been on Earth for about 300,000 years, but we've only started polluting like this in the last 60. Our pollution stays in the air for thousands of years, creating a thickening blanket that traps heat in the atmosphere. That heat causes stronger hurricanes, bigger fires, more frequent floods, and the extinction of thousands of species. But there's good news. To stop the pollution blanket, we just have to stop polluting. Go to ScienceMoms.com to learn how.
So we've got a bunch of these explainers, which are really done in very basic language, and we really try to avoid all the methane and greenhouse gas and emissions and net zero and so forth. By the way, on net zero, it's happening, it's good, I'm happy about it. We have a goal, we have an endpoint, there's something to shoot for. It turns out that 100% clean is a little more motivating than net zero. I'm not sure what to do with that because we've got a bunch of companies that are getting behind it, but there's just a reason for that, which is people want to go to a happy place rather than an empty place. And so there's just some sort of basic human understanding that helps us with that. The next lesson in terms of people getting it is to make it relatable. This is our single most effective ad to date. And I just want to play it for you, and you'll get an understanding of what kind of thing we found really works. So this is out of 50 ads we've tested. This is the one that is tested the very best.
If an entire neighborhood's worth of doctors told you your mole was cancerous,
Yes, that's cancer.
would you keep it?
I'm not cancerous.
If an entire town's worth of mechanics said you needed new brakes, would you be like, yeah, I'm good? If an entire city's worth of plumbers told you not to use paper towels when you run out of TP,
Don't do it.
would you keep flushing them? If an entire country's worth of fitness instructors said you were lifting wrong,
You're lifting wrong.
would you risk it and mess up your body? If an entire planet's worth of scientists agreed that climate change is real, would you ignore them? Because you know there ain't no coming back from this, right? Over 99% of climate scientists agree that climate change is here. It's man-made, but it's only getting worse. Go to ScienceMoms.com to take action.
So that's kind of fun and a little gory, it gets people's attention, but I think that the simple message of 99% scientists has landed incredibly well because it's basic and you can get it through with analogy. The other thing I just want to mention on I Get It is we need to make the point in ways that people understand and they like. And so I talked about this clean energy, like this is early research, and I'm not necessarily advocating that we move away from net zero, but just as we communicate it, we might call it net zero pollution. But just so you know, the relative preference of what people would want a company to do would be to get to 100% clean, then eliminate carbon pollution and get to net zero. And the last one would be decarbonize their operations. It's for an obvious reason. People understand what they're talking about. So the number two thing that we focus a lot on is really the relevant side, getting it to matter to the individual. Most social issues start with the issue and try and tell everybody why it matters. And it matters a lot to us, so we want to tell it to them in our terms. We're doing the opposite. We're the group that says, who's the audience? Now I'm going to figure out what the message is. So the Moms campaign, the Science Moms campaign is about your kids, right? It's about your kids' future. It's about in their lifetimes, what are the different things going to happen? We have a campaign called Know Your Flood Factor, which is for conservative property owners in Florida, and it's about the value of their homes. We'll likely start a campaign about handing down the family farm as we go into 2022 for farmers in the American Midwest. So I found more than anything, any other product I've ever tried to sell, segmentation is essential. And so, by the way, I don't think women is a segment. I mean, I don't even know if moms is a segment. Latina moms is closer to being a segment, but inside any of these segments are different concerns and different needs and different values and different identities and different worries and different economics. And so it's really important that we do this. We did an interesting experiment where we created a different message for a whole bunch of different groups. So we had a message for evangelicals, for frontline communities, for suburban moms, for veterans, for outdoors people, for farmers, and for labor. And then we had a universal message. And more so than any other thing I've worked on in my 30-year career, the customized message beats the universal message. That's not true with just do it at Nike. That's not true with anything I've worked on on the corporate sphere. But in climate change, you've got to start with the individual, go to relevance, and then go to the bigger thing, which may mean not saying climate. It may mean actually starting with another piece. Some things are universal. Motherhood is one of those things that I hope is universal enough that it can break down cultural and identity barriers, but so many different things are segment driven. I want to tell you who the most movable segment is analytically. That's not to say we can't move everybody, because we have to. We got 8 billion of us on Earth, and we've all got to care about this to make the tough sacrifices. But in my analytics, these are randomized controlled trials. The top decile of the most persuadable citizens in America have an average age of 51. 92% of them are women. So I'm quoted in this article in the New Yorker saying men are useless. And I kind of mean it, because only 8% of them were. Now, that may be just because I've failed to come up with messages that move them as much, and we're going to keep trying. But I'm just telling you the analytics show you that women are very important to this. 41% more likely to be a parent, twice as likely to be Hispanic, average income of less than $100,000, mix of high school and college, and actually equal parts conservative and liberal. So that's really important. And I think that's one of the reasons that your group exists and why this meeting is happening, is because women, especially moms, especially in a certain age group, are really movable on this issue, and they haven't really been talked to as much. We've built a whole bunch of custom audiences. So we go on Facebook, we build a whole bunch of audiences, and then we see which ones move the most. And so our lowest cost per acquisition is with the moms audience today. So I want to invest more in this. The other part about making it matter to me is that going deep to make a connection. So a core part of our marketing is to do these really deep profiles. So every single thing we do is around Jill from Wisconsin or Robin from Arizona. And these women exist. They're in a panel. We have a digital panel where we can ask them questions every night. And we keep asking ourselves the question, not about the message, but about Jill. Would Jill like this? What's going on in Jill's world? We try to be as disciplined about that as if we were selling any other particular product. And so we've got a whole set of different things that we need to do to appeal to Jill. Jill's a moderate mom. It's more important to her that she's a mom than, and we don't talk about policy. We use a whole bunch of different phrases, like we don't make it sound environmentalist. We make it sound very pragmatic. We don't exaggerate with Jill. We avoid liberal trigger words. So we have this playbook, and then we'll check in with her every week. And I mean, we have 90 Jills on a digital focus group to see how we're resonating with her. The other lesson I always wanted to share is that to make it feel like it's for individuals, we need to make it feel like it's coming that matters to my life individually and personally. And so we this is talk a little bit about the Science Moms Forum. So we have been looking for, as relevant as possible connection points to the mom community. So we've recruited, I think it's a little larger now, about 9 moms who are scientists, or 9 scientists who are moms, depending on how you want to describe it, who are really kind of superheroes, but they're pretty relatable. And we've been elevating them into spokespeople roles. And the really valuable thing about this is they're really good communicators, because they're scientists. They're used to getting up in front of a couple hundred students and teaching them complicated concepts. But they're very real and they're very relatable. And they're able to describe things in simple terms, but they're also able to describe how they feel. And I've always felt like there's a bunch of people walking around with this dark secret about what's actually going to happen to their kids' future, and giving them a voice has some emotional currency. The other thing that we found works really well is relatable benefits. So I'm going to share another ad with you, and then I'll wrap up with a couple other points. But the point of this ad is to bring it down to earth. it turns out that people are a lot more interested in local benefits and benefits to them than they are in global benefits. There are certainly a large group of the population who care about global prosperity and global connections and so forth, but most people are thinking about their own lives. So this is a spot we made that was really effective in trying to position climate change as an opportunity for people.
Calling all builders, all welders and roofers, engineers and electricians, calling all brick masons and boiler makers, steel workers and steam fitters. Your country is calling you to rebuild America, to create a cleaner, safer, more prosperous future for all. Tackling climate change. This is the job of our lifetime. The Great American Bill is here. Let's get to work.
So that's the question. What's the benefit? What's in it for me? What do I get out of it? And so that's a whole line of work revolving around the opportunity side of things. And then the last thing on this part is a sense of involvement and a sense of purpose. We've been trying to get people to sign petitions, and so we've tested about 100 ads, no, 112 ads to get people to write letters. And the one on the right-hand side has never lost. And it may be a little bit of clickbait, but it actually, I think, hasn't lost for a couple of reasons. So it says if every mom sent this letter, every child would be safer. And so it has two dimensions to it. It has relevance, because moms have children and they're worried about their children not being safe, and climate change is a threat to the safety of their children. But it also has unity. It's about what everybody can do together. So this has a click-through rate of about 6.8%, and your average ad has a click-through rate. Well, your average ad has a click-through rate about 0.5%, but on the acquisition campaign, about 3%. So this is like far more effective than anything we've ever done. And by the way, it's equally effective when we put parent in and when we put grandparent in, and almost equally effective when we put dad in, not quite, because the mom sign up at a much, much higher rate. So this notion of collective action for the welfare of our children seems to work incredibly well. And we didn't necessarily expect this. We tested 112 different things, but this is the one that has performed the best. I'll skip this one here a little bit, and I want to go to, because I'm a little short on time, I want to go to local. Local benefits tend to beat global benefits. And so this campaign we ran on local flooding, which is called Know Your Flood Factor, is about like what's happening in your community. So both local costs and local benefits appear to have much higher resonance than other things. So we've been running those ads as well. So then the last of the three lessons is it matters to people like me. And I think, the key to this is to have spokespeople who are really relevant. And so Melissa Burt is an African-American climate scientist who teaches in Colorado. She's awesome. She is really passionate about connecting with Black moms and brown moms and moms like her. And she has gotten so much, her stuff is so much more effective than anything I've ever seen with the African-American community, because people can relate to her voice, and she gets so much fan mail. And one of the reasons is when you watch something like this, you get to know Melissa, and you get to really, see what her life is like and why she does what she does. So this is another tearjerker if you can take it. Oops, let me go back. Just takes a second to load. How is it, Maria? Is the quality okay of the video so far?
It is not playing yet. It's still loading. Just starting.
I remember this one moment. We go to the beach a lot. I ran to kind of the water edge, and my mom said something along the lines of like, now it's your turn. Take that first step. Just like my mom wanted my life to be better than what she had as a kid. When I became a mom myself, I feel like my whole world changed. Sometimes I feel like I'm just looking at myself in a mirror. There's some light that's there within her that makes me continue to do the climate science work that I do. You don't have to be a climate scientist to want to protect the earth. As moms, we care about our children and the environment they grow up in. And for Mia, I want you to know that I worked really hard to be a part of the change and to make it a better place for you.
So that's a scientist you can identify with, and that's been a really powerful piece of work. We have a 30% increase in African Americans joining the climate movement when they see this video, and that's a pretty high lift. Normally, you get a couple of percentage points. And then the vote like a moderator is similar, except in this case, we got Jennifer Lopez and Salma Hayek, and a whole bunch of people from the Latino community to get the message across, and a lot of micro-influencers, a lot of individuals in different communities are spreading the message, and they all promised their kids with a pinky promise that they would vote for them and vote for their future. And this is a campaign that had a pretty significant impact in Florida and Arizona in terms of Latinx turnout. So I think I'm at time, but just I will send you guys this presentation. But I just as a summary, because there's some other stuff in here, and there's some other fun stuff. You guys can all take a look at it, but I want to save a little bit of time for questions. So my summary slide would be: start with segments, go to the basics, make it deeply, personally, locally, identity relevant, and make it part of the community with the messengers and the the people you love as part of the message. And that formula seems to be working pretty well for us. How are we doing on time? Is that good? Should we take questions now?
Yeah, thank you, John. Just dry my eyes. Thank you. Meredith, I'll call on you to help us out here. So for folks, if you have specific questions for John, please use the chat and include them in there. I don't know if we have any on deck yet. I think, one of the things that stood out for me in the work is around just kind of bringing forward the panel that we had earlier today. And a number of the researchers pointed that there seems to be a difference in terms of level of worry, that there are ways that the women's segment stand out, but there are also, fundamental pieces that don't make them different. So I'm just wondering if in the research that you've done, are there a couple of kind of things that have stood out for you that really crystallize how women are different, or any of the kind of segments that you've mentioned, moms or Latino moms? Yeah,
and there's always a risk of generalizing because but I'll just tell you what the data says to insulate myself from being a stereotyper. First of all, the data says that on the baseline, the differences aren't that much, a few points in terms of like degree of concern or Six Americas or support for climate action. But it definitely says that when you talk to a mom or a woman about it, they move significantly more. And I see this in focus groups too. I don't know if that's a thing where women are absorbing information better than men, but it's just a fact that the movability. And so I have X amount of donor money, and so I'm spending it in here because I'll get more voters if I do that. So that's just a fact. I think there are certainly messages that work across the board, both politically and gender-wise. And so universal messages, regardless, are about scientific consensus and about foundations. They work for everybody. I think the generational messaging works particularly well for moms. And so talking about kids and future, and then inside your political views, different messages work for different groups, right? So more stewardship messages work for the evangelical women versus more nature-based messages actually work very well for Hispanic women. And so there are different messages that work for different subsegments. But honestly, I think there's 95 segments within women, and the question is like, what's the identity trigger that you can go after? but motherhood is something that, I don't know, 75 or 80% of women share. And so that's tended to be the power message for us.
Thank you. Meredith, over to you.
Yeah, we're getting lots of questions. Thanks, everyone. Keep putting them in the chat there. Kind of practical question about how you find the moms to target. Are you looking at Facebook groups, or just a little bit about your process there?
Yeah, we've built a model on the TargetSmart voter file where we scored everybody. We basically did a bunch of analytics, and then we built a model to score everyone on the TargetSmart voter file, which you can match into digital marketing to score people based on how much they can move and what message tends to work best for them. That being said, so that works pretty well, but that's like a decently sophisticated approach. Facebook, Facebook works well. Like I showed you that slide where like the Facebook identifies as moms has a lower cost than Facebook who doesn't. And then zip code has worked very well for us as well. We've run a bunch of analytics to say like, where are the pockets of people we can move the most? It's been in the suburbs a little bit more. It's definitely been with minorities. It's been in the suburbs. It's not been rural. And it's been particularly in states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And so we then tend to go and find those folks. But I think, even on a smaller budget than what we have, you can create Facebook audiences and do A/B tests and test and learn and see who responds the most, and then change and update your audiences in order to have increasing impact. There's lots
Great.
of
A couple questions around the types of actions that people are inspired to take. So whether you have data on what kind of action people are able to move, what are they actually doing, and whether a complementary question about whether there's been success moving people from taking those, signing on to a petition to taking more sustained action, and if there's complementary grassroots strategies for these ad campaigns.
Yeah, we're about to test that much more systematically. To date, we've been focused a lot on writing Congress, and so we've driven the cost down. We're now about to test a whole bunch of other actions. I mean, higher bar actions are, joining a group and, doing a petition and so forth. We're about to test taking individual action in your life and then test, does it make you more inclined to take political action? We are finding that taking pledges for individual behavior change is expensive. I had an idea that I thought was great. That wasn't that everyone would pledge that my next car would be an electric car, and I found that was very expensive. And so I'm not giving up on that, but we're finding that letter writing and political actions are actually a little cheaper than some of the bigger behavior change. Like I'm going to convert my diet, or I'm going to buy an electric vehicle. We got to keep working on that because it's a really important part of it, and I don't want to have anyone take away that that's like a definitive conclusion. And I'm happy to provide data as we go as to what we learn. But I think the really simple actions in your life, sharing stories, is something that has a lot of impact, and it's reasonably easy to get people to do. It's decently easy to get people to hit a button and write Congress, but getting someone to think about big life changes typically has been harder for us.
Yeah, and related to that, there's a question of whether you tested how long that persuasion lasted after they watched the ads. Is there follow-up to see if folks are still kind of incorporating behavior changes or being engaged at certain points after the fact?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we just finished a persuasion decay test. We found a couple of things. We found that if we spend 5.5 cents per person, we can get a 1% increase in support for climate action. And so we can kind of, which equates to about 13 or 14 impressions a week. So we kind of figured out that math, but then the question was, okay, if we stop talking to them, what happens? Did we get someone to marry the issue, or did we just get somebody to date the issue? We're seeing some decay, which is normal, which means there's a salience thing. But if I did this in my commercial life, like I would do an introduction for a product, and then like Coke would spend a lot on new Coke, and then you would get 1 Coke impression per week for the rest of your life. And so we found that if we spend 2 cents a week, which is pretty low, it's like basically getting an ad a week, we can sustain the impact. And so we can get rid of the decay. So a big part of climate change is salience, keeping in the conversation. Only 7% of people talk about it very often. And so what we tend to do is we tend to run a big persuasion push, and then we tend to have a drip feed that keeps people thinking about the issue. I believe our decay will go down because I think there's a thing called the sleeper effect, where you're like subconsciously getting a message in somebody's head, and so 6 months later our decay might be lower than it is now. But we're basically seeing some decay after about 6 weeks, and then we're getting rid of it if we have one message per week on an ongoing basis.
Great. And there's a question here about segmenting women in particular, and having, whether you have testing where you compare the messages tested with the whole population versus just women to get a sense of the difference in social commentary in these spaces. Sarah says that she's tested the same ad with groups of women in the general population, and the response in the general audience to the climate is much more harsh or negative. So now she never shows ads to men and women at the same time. So just looking at that comparison between testing with general population and female audiences.
It's definitely true, seeing exactly the same thing, and you can get a lot of backlash. You get more backlash in a men's audience than you do in a women's audience. And so it's an interesting thing, like when I go on TV, because some of these ads are really good for TV, I'm saying I'm really growing the climate group, but I'm also creating backlash because I'm not targeting. And so a bunch of more conservative men may be seeing the ad, and I may be activating them to be anti-climate because I'm activating that part of our brain. And so I'm torn because the TV is really effective, but I can't target it. So we've kind of steered down to one-to-one marketing with occasionally doing some radio and stuff like that, because we don't want to spend money that goes in the opposite direction. So I totally agree with Sarah's point on this, that being targeted with a message. Now, my other theory, which I think is true, but I haven't proven it, is when we're really effective targeting the mom's also with the family, and the kid also cares about the issue. And so you can create a family issue, and that's the way to loop in the dad, is via the kid and the mom. But if I go direct to oil is evil to the dad, I'm going to create a decent amount of backlash among conservatives, and I'm not going to have the same economics.
Great. Well, we're going to break in 1 minute, and I want to be aware of that because we've been on for a little while now. Maybe just one, we're getting lots of great questions that maybe we can get to after the fact, but just a quick clarifying question for this last minute about what you meant by avoid the tells in that last point, whether you're avoiding environmental lingo, just a quick clarification on that.
Yes, and I can send you the presentation. It's about political tells. There's no need to bundle it with other political issues. We might as well win all political parties. And so there's a bunch of things that we subconsciously do if we're on the progressive side, like little language things, and a lot about save the blank or global. There's all these little language things that make you feel, oh, that's a liberal thing that might not be for me if you're a moderate or you're conservative. And so we're trying to take extra pains to use words like conservation and stewardship. And I'll tell you one really interesting thing. If I just stick the word nonpartisan in an ad, I get significant lift. And then we did this, and then we asked a bunch of women in our panel, like, do you think this is a partisan thing? And they're like, no, it says nonpartisan. And so it actually was like the simplest thing that you can do. So I'm putting nonpartisan, I'm relaunching our Science Moms website, and we're putting the word nonpartisan everywhere, because just asserting that it's nonpartisan sort of takes out the first reaction to a lot of people was, yeah, that's that liberal thing, isn't it? I don't quite understand it, but it's not really for me. And so that's tended to work a huge amount. We ran an ad which had it was kind of a joke ad, and it had someone talking about Leo DiCaprio, and then there was another one that had somebody talking about Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, and it had an 8-point swing. The conservatives loved The Rock, and they didn't like at all the Leo part. And so I don't know how often I should say this, but the Leo thing is like, that's the Leo group. It's not for me. But when you put Dwayne Johnson in the ad, it was an 8-point improvement of conservative appeal on climate change. So there's all these tiny little things that we don't necessarily realize if we're on the progressive side, kind of hint at the conservative side that it's coming from a different group.
Great. Thanks so much, John. I think maybe I'll turn it over to Amber to take us into the break, but I really appreciated it.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. Thank you, John, so much. I think all of us will be very excited and waiting patiently to get a copy of the deck.